Just as you must not talk about the case face-to-face, you must not talk about the case using an electronic device. Do not use phones, computers, or other electronic devices to communicate. Do not send or accept any messages related to this case or your jury's service. Do not discuss this case or ask for advice by any means at all, which would include posting information on an internet website, chat room, or blog. These rules get repetitive, I understand, but they are imposed because jurors must decide the case without distraction and only on the evidence presented in the courtroom. If you investigate, research, or make inquiries on your own, I would have no way to make sure that that information you obtain is proper for this case. The parties likewise would have no opportunity to dispute or challenge the accuracy of what you might find on your own. That is contrary to our judicial system, which assures every party the right to ask questions about and challenge the evidence being considered against it and to present argument with respect to that evidence. Any independent investigation by a juror unfairly and improperly prevents the party from having that opportunity our judicial system promises. Any juror who violates these restrictions jeopardizes the fairness of these proceedings, and a mistrial could result that would require the entire trial process to start over. A mistrial is a tremendous expense and inconvenience to the parties, the court, and the taxpayers. If you violate these rules, you may be held in contempt of court and face sanctions that could include incarceration, a fine, or both. In every criminal proceeding, a defendant has the absolute right to remain silent. At no time is it the duty of the defendant to prove his or her innocence. From the exercise of a defendant's right to remain silent, a jury is not permitted to draw any inference of guilt. And the fact that a defendant did not take the witness stand must not influence your verdict in any manner whatsoever. The attorneys are trained in the rules of evidence and trial procedure, and it is their duty to make all objections they feel are proper. When an objection is made, you should not speculate on the reason why it was made. Likewise, when an objection is sustained or upheld by me, you must not speculate on what might have occurred if the objection had not been sustained, nor what a witness might have said had he or she been permitted to answer the question that drew the objection. During trial, it may be necessary for me to confer with attorneys outside of your hearing to discuss matters of law and other matters that require my consideration alone. We do not know, and it's impossible to predict when such a conference may be required or how long it will last. If we do them, we'll try to do them up here at the bench. We had a couple yesterday, so we don't have to excuse you from the room. That sometimes is more efficient. However, there might be occasions where we will excuse you to take care of court business that would not be appropriate for a jury to hear. We talked a little bit about note-taking yesterday, and you should have notepads there in front of you. If you would like to take notes during the trial, you may do so. However, you are not required to. We would leave that up to you. Any notes you take will be for your personal use. During the trial, however, you do not take them with you from the courtroom. During recesses, you can leave the notepads on your chair. The court deputies will make sure nobody disturbs your notes during recesses. The final time that you retire to deliberate, we do allow you to take your notes with you at that time, and you would have them with you in the jury room. After you have completed your deliberations, the court deputies will destroy your notes. Nobody will ever read your notes. If you do take notes, please do not get so involved in note-taking that it distracts you from the proceedings. Your notes should be used only as an aid to your memory. Whether or not you take notes, you should rely on your memory of the evidence, and you should not be unduly influenced during deliberations by notes of other jurors. Notes are not entitled to any greater weight than each juror's memory of the evidence. So a summary on that, when you leave the courtroom just for a break during the trial, you leave the notepads here. The last time you retire for deliberations, you will take your notepads with you. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, those are the instructions that I have for you. We can move to opening statements at this time. We begin with the state. Mr. Williams, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
May it please the court.
Yes, sir.
Counsel. There is fear in the unknown, ladies and gentlemen. We know this from our common everyday experience in life. We know this from simple things like the more modern need to calendar every minute of every day plan so that we know what's going to happen. We know this from the common fear of the darkness that many people suffer. And it is not the fear of the darkness itself or the lack of light, it's what's in it, or what we do not know is in it. Ladies and gentlemen, on June 1st of 2012, the unknown and the fear that accompanies it approached not the door, but the bedroom of two young women in Orlando. As the evidence will show in this case, a man, then unknown man, entered the apartment of these two young women. That man was wearing a mask and gloves, and he carried a knife. The evidence in this case will show that when he got inside their apartment, he threatened them, he took items that belonged to them in cash, and he tied one of them up. And he left the one he tied up to listen to him sexually assault her roommate on the other side of the wall. As the evidence unfolds, ladies and gentlemen, it will show that the man behind the mask on the morning of June 1st was Edgar Collazo. Now, how will that evidence unfold? It will begin with the testimony of Stewart Wog. Mr. Wog will tell you that back on June 1st of 2012, he was living not at the apartment complex, but at Lake Charlotte Drive. Mr. Wog will tell you that his sister, Lauren, and her roommate, Chesney, lived about 5 miles away. He will testify this morning that at around 4:30 a.m. on the morning of the 1st, he was awoken to the sound of screaming. And as he got out of bed, he encountered his sister and her roommate hysterical. And he will recount for you the series of events that unfolded, which culminated with him calling 911, or actually with Lauren calling 911 and handing the phone to him in hysterics. Mr. Wog will tell you that shortly after that, law enforcement arrived, and when they arrived, they took a statement from him, and they took statements from the two young women. After Mr. Wog testifies, you'll hear from a young lady named Chesney Goldman. Ms. Goldman will tell you that on June 1st, she was 23 years old. She'll tell you that she was not from Orlando, and she moved from Washington State when she met Lauren on a cruise. And she wanted to start a life here in Central Florida, as so many people want to do. Ms. Goldman will testify that after she moved down to Orlando, shortly afterwards, they moved into an apartment complex called the Aubers Villages, which is right off of Cimarron Boulevard behind Baldwin Park in Orange County. She will tell you that they lived in a first-floor apartment number 106, that had 2 bedrooms. Ms. Goldman will recall the night of May 31st as uneventful, and she'll tell you that that night she and Lauren watched One Tree Hill and went to bed without thinking about anything that was about to happen. Ms. Goldman will say that sometime between 3 and 4 a.m., she awoke to a figure, an unknown, dark figure climbing in her bedroom window. And you'll see photographs of that window in Ms. Goldman's bedroom. She'll tell you that the man, who at that point she couldn't see, approached her and told her to shut up and threatened to kill her. He took her cell phone from her and demanded other items of property as he walked around her bedroom. It didn't take long until the man, in a deep voice, started to threaten to tie her up as she begged him, she would testify in the evidence would show, not to do so. But eventually you'll hear that he yanked the cord out of the wall and tied it in loops and used those loops to put around her wrist. Chesney Goebel will say that she was bound with her arms behind her back and left in her bedroom and told that she would be untied if she just remained quiet. few minutes will pass, and Ms. Goebel will say that the man, at this point still unidentified, is walking in and out of her bedroom, looking for items of property, mumbling to himself about a television and others who may be coming. Chesney Goebel will tell you that at some point she becomes aware of the fact that this man has found her roommate. And she'll tell you that she hears a gasp coming from Lauren Wog's room. She'll say that for several minutes she hears them moving about the living room and in Miss Wog's room. At some point she will hear them go back into Miss Wog's room and she'll hear Miss Wog start to cry. Chesney Goebel will tell you that at that point she managed to get herself off the bed and use her elbow to turn the light on to the bathroom that illuminates the hallway. And shortly after that, she sees the man coming towards her. And it's at this point that she realizes that this unknown man is wearing a ski mask and dark clothes. And she sees the leather gloves that she felt bound her behind her back. Ms. Goebel will testify that he slams his hand against the wall, threatens her again. This time she eats the threat and goes back to her room. And though she had the opportunity to escape out the window, she did not take it because she didn't want to leave her friend behind. She will say that after that she heard the sounds coming from the other room and knew what was happening. And Ms. Goebel will tell you that shortly after that she heard the sound of water running. Moments later, the front door shuts, and her friend and roommate, Lauren Wog, comes, unties her, and the two of them escape out the front door and drive to the only place they know, which is Lauren's brother's house on Lake Shore Drive. So you'll hear from Ms. Goebel, and then after you hear from Ms. Goebel, you're going to hear from Ms. Wog. Ms. Wog's testimony will be very similar to what I just told you as far as the night, how they met, up until she encounters this unknown man differently, because Ms. Wog will tell you that she was sound asleep in her pitch black room when she feels presence over her. She'll tell you that, like Ms. Goebel, she is threatened, shut up, she'll be killed, property is demanded, and at some point they end up in the living room, her and this unknown person. And that when they end up in the living room, the man takes a backpack, he shoves her laptop into it, and she gives him the $200 in cash that she had made from working the previous evening at a local restaurant. Ms. Wog will then tell you that what that man wanted changed after he received the property and money, and that he began to demand sexual acts from her. I suspect that she won't remember the exact sequence of events, but she will say that while in the living room, there's a scuffle as she attempts to fight him off initially, but she ends up on the floor of her living room, and that when she stands back up, the man in the mask puts her in a chokehold, and though she's not sure she ever saw it, she feels a knife to her throat. Lauren Wog will say that she is taken back to her bedroom, and when she is taken back into her bedroom, the sexual acts are again demanded. She refuses until he places a pillow over her face, and she will tell you, in words that I will let her use, because I cannot do them justice, why she stops struggling. She'll tell you that the masked man put his penis in her mouth and eventually penetrated her vagina with his penis. She'll say that as quickly as it started, it stopped. And for reasons that she doesn't know, he got off of her, ordered her into the bath to wash off, and then he went to the kitchen and she heard him spraying down the bed with food of some sort, and we never know what it was. She'll say that shortly after that, Ms. Wog heard the front door shut and she went to find her friend, Chesney, and the two of them. That's the the testimony and evidence you'll hear from the two people who were present in Apartment 106 at 4 a.m. on June 1st. But you're also going to hear about the investigation that law enforcement did following that. And specifically, you're going to hear from a couple of key individuals. You're going to hear from Sergeant Richard Mankiewicz from the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Sergeant Mankiewicz will tell you that he is the supervisor of the sex crime unit, Sheriff's Office, and has been so for about 12 years. He'll tell you that they got a call via 911 around 4:30 a.m. from Mr. Wog, and that he and his team responded. And that one detective went to the Lake Sharp Drive address to meet with the victims. And pretty much all of the other ones went to the apartment complex. He will describe for you the steps that were taken that day, the attempts to interview or find any witnesses who may have seen something in the early morning hours, the collection of evidence. He'll talk about the fact that a crime scene technician named Allison Smolar was called out, and she will testify as to the photographs that she took, including the one of the cord, collection of that cord, her taking bugle swabs from the victim in the case, and that she processed all of this evidence, and some of it was sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for testing. And unfortunately, you're going to hear from Sergeant Mankiewicz that that is where the trail ran cold. That despite the fact that there were massive attempts to identify the man in the mask in 2012, they were unsuccessful. What you'll hear, however, after that, shortly after that, from Sergeant Mankiewicz is that he got an investigative lead in July of 2014. And that lead led him to the name Edgar Collazo. Sergeant Mankiewicz will tell you that he traveled, because now it's almost 2 years later, to meet with Ms. Goebel and Ms. Wog, and he put Edgar Collazo in a photographic lineup. And true to their early testimony, they had no idea who anybody was because they couldn't see a face that night. You'll hear that they described their attacker as blackmail, but they will also say that they never saw anybody's skin color that night because it was covered by clothing and mask. The significant part about that, ladies and gentlemen, is that when he shows them the photograph of Edgar Collazo, they say they've never met Mr. Collazo, they have no idea who he is, no chance encounters in the apartment complex, they didn't go to school with him, he is a stranger, and they've never seen him before. After that, you'll hear that Sergeant Mankiewicz gets a search warrant for the DNA evidence of Edgar Collazo. And you'll hear that from a crime scene technician that she went and met with Mr. Collazo and took a Q-tip around the inside of his mouth to get skin cells that would allow an analyst to develop a DNA profile. And from that DNA profile, you will hear it was compared to another item of evidence. Because you see, when Lauren Wog was interviewed, she was taken back to the apartment, she was interviewed again, and then after that, she was examined. And you're going to hear that that examination consisted of a nurse taking swabs from different parts of her body, taking some very intimate parts of her body, and importantly, for our purposes, collecting the clothing that she wore that night. And Lauren Wog will testify, and she'll identify a gray T-shirt that she had on, that she had pulled out of her drawer, belonged to her ex-boyfriend, that she just so happened to be wearing on the morning of June 1st. You're going to hear from Jillian White, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and she's going to tell you that that shirt was sent to a laboratory, and that suspected semen stains were tested, and that a DNA profile was developed from those semen stains. You're going to hear that that profile is part epithelial skin cells and part sperm cells. Ms. Reese White, Jillian Reese White, will tell you on stand that she compared the profile that was received from stains on that T-shirt to the profile from the swab that was taken from Edgar Collazo, and that they match. Significantly, ladies and gentlemen, after that, you're going to hear again from Sergeant Richard Mankiewicz. He will tell you that he he had a conversation with Edgar Collazo. He'll tell you that he read Mr. Collazo his Miranda rights, that Mr. Collazo understood them, and that Mr. Collazo was shown photographs of these two young ladies and said he had no idea who they were. And if he did recognize them, maybe it was from those two. Most importantly, he denied ever having sex with either one of them. He will also tell you, though he doesn't know the exact time frame, that he lived in the apartment complex at Aubrey's Village at one time. That is the testimony and evidence that you're going to hear in this case. You are going to hear that Chesney Goebel and Lauren Wog were asleep in their bedroom when a masked man came in and changed their lives forever. And you're going to hear that the only thing that masked man left behind was a semen, and that semen belonged to Edgar Collazo. And after you hear that evidence and testimony, he will return to you and ask you to find the defendant guilty of the charge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am?
Yes, sir. Mr. Adams, whenever you are.
On June 1st, 2012, Blossom Canales was laying asleep in her apartment in the Auburn Village next to the father of her child. She knows this because she wakes up every night in the early morning hours and checks on her family. It's a habit that she has. She does it every single night. And on the early morning hours, she woke up, as she does. She walked around the apartment. She checked on her kids. She looked around, poked her head out the window. Nothing unusual was happening. How does she know she did that on June 1st, 2012? Because that day is a very memorable day. When she woke up in the apartment that morning, everybody in the apartment knew what happened. Law enforcement is canvassing the entire parking lot. They're talking to people. Media is present. There's divers in the lake looking for evidence. There's a bloodhound out there. It was a topic of conversation. And so she remembers hearing about the details and thinking to herself, my God, I would have woken up at about that time. I would have looked out the window. I don't remember seeing anything unusual. And she remembers that Edgar Collazo was laying in the bed next to her when it happened. At about the same time, you're going to hear that Chesney Goebel apparently sees a person coming through her window, straddling the window. A person that she describes as a 6-foot-tall, heavy-set black man, weighing approximately 240 pounds. She's going to say that he came through her window, looked her property, tied her up, and then moved on, leaving her undisturbed for extended periods of time. And then you're going to hear from Lauren Wog, who's going to tell you about the person who she described as a male, 6 foot to 6'2", black male weighing about 240 pounds who attacked her sexually. I know you know what Edgar Collazo looks like, and he is not a large black male. Now, as the state said, after they got a partial match on some DNA, they did some photo lineups. The girls, of course, did not take out Edgar Collazo out of those photo lineups. You're going to hear about some oddities about Chesney Goebel's testimony. The area outside of her window is mostly dirt. She would have had things laying in front of her window. She's going to say that the window was locked, or at least that she told people the window was definitely locked because she had been out of town very recently before that. That if there was no dirt, no footprints, no indication that anybody had come through that window. The attacker ties her up. She gets loose. She very quickly loosens it up, yet she sits there in the apartment with a window on the first floor level for the duration of the attack that did last for an extended period of time. She went through stretches of 15 minutes or more with nobody in her room. She wouldn't have been able to see the person that she describes as a large black male, because you're going to hear about a bright light that sits outside of both of the windows, so bright that Lord Wag took measures to create a blackout in her room. She has special curtains that go behind the blinds, because otherwise the light would be shining into her room. That's the same wall that the person would have been coming through into Chesney Gobel's room. Now, she also says that she sees him when at some point, when the person is outside of her room, she walks to her bathroom and she flips a light switch. When that happens, she sees a person walking towards her. She looks at his legs that are exposed and says he has dark, skinny legs. And again, she was consistent about the large black male. Now, every single person that law enforcement investigated was either a friend, a person that Chesney Gobel had a prior relationship to, or a friend of one of those people. Neither one of those girls saw any weapon. There's some fingerprints that were taken from the window and a can of cleaner that was possibly used by the attacker. Law enforcement came in, they dusted, they took the prints, they compared them to Edgar. They compared them to the girls to make sure it wasn't theirs because they lived there naturally. None of those prints came back to Edgar. There was some prints that didn't belong to any of them. They never found out who those prints belonged to. Edgar Collazo didn't know those girls. He did live there in that apartment complex, and he did use the communal laundry that everybody did at that apartment complex. Now, there was a bloodhound that at some point they used to attempt to do a track. It did not pick up any scent. It did not lead to the apartment that Edgar Collazo lived in. After the attack, condom and wrapper are found outside. At some point, Chesney Gobel finds a used condom outside of her complex. This is after law enforcement had left. She calls law enforcement. She gives them a used condom. No match to Edgar Collazo. The only evidence the state has to support the allegations they have here today is a sample on a shirt that cannot be dated, that does not belong to Lord Wag. You see, law enforcement can do tests to try to determine who the sample came from. Oftentimes there's a match, sometimes there's not a match. Sometimes they're working with what they call partial matches. Sometimes they're working within partial. You're going to get an education on DNA. You probably don't understand what I'm telling you now. But DNA is kind of like a series of addresses. They can separate it into definable parts. And when they talk about a partial match, what that means is that one of those several addresses has similarities to a person. That's a partial match. A partial within partial is when just one of the many, just one or more, but not all of the several addresses has a similarity. That's a partial match. That is not enough for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to say it is a match. There was a sample taken, of course, from the cervix along with other areas that had DNA that was identified as a mixture. Law enforcement was not able to say that that was any kind of match to Edgar Collazo. The state will likely introduce evidence of another attack because they don't have the evidence in this case. We will defend that, of course. But all the evidence you're going to hear about are these partial within partial. And you're going to hear about the more partial DNA matches, meaning the less amount of addresses that have a similarity the more likely it is that that partial match would also be a partial match of another person. You'll also hear about how family members, people with the same mother and father, can share up to 50% of the DNA. And that people with more DNA are going to have a more likely chance of having a partial match. That Edgar Collazo does have two brothers who live in town who share the same family members. Once law enforcement interviewed Mr. Collazo, he attempted to be cooperative for as long as he could. Years had passed. He didn't realize that they were talking about the Aubers complex until well into the interview. He tried to be cooperative. He tried to help them out. He tried to decide if they were asking him about girls he may have had some sort of relationship with, or that he had previously known. He didn't know those girls. He had never met them. As he sits here today, he is presumed innocent. The state will not meet their burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he is guilty, and you must find him innocent.
Thank you. Well, is the state ready to call its first witness?
We are, Your Honor.
You may do so.
State called Stewart Wog.
Last name?
Wog, W-A-A-G.
Stewart Wog.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this case is the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Whenever.
Sir, could you please tell us your full name and spell your last name for the record?
My name is Stewart Michael Wog. Last name is W-A-A-G.
Mr. Wog, in what city do you currently reside?
Tampa, Florida.
How long have you lived in Tampa?
About 2.5 years, almost 3.
Did you previously live within the city of Orlando?
Yes.
When did you first move to Orlando?
I moved to Orlando in 2002.
When you lived in Orlando, did you live at one address or multiple addresses?
Multiple addresses.
Where was the address you were living back on June 1st of 2012?
2012, I was living in East Orlando, Lake Sharp Drive
Okay.
was the street.
Do you have any siblings, Mr. Wog?
I do.
What are their names, and if you could tell us if they're blood siblings or step siblings?
I have one blood sibling, Lauren Wog, and 2 step through marriage, one Devin, and one Nicole.
What's the age gap between yourself and your sister Lauren?
6.5 years.
Back in 2012, can you describe your relationship with your sister Lauren Wog?
A very, very good relationship, very close. She's probably my closest best friend, especially at that time.
How often would you see her back in 2012?
Very often.
How many times a week?
On average, I would say at least 4 to 5 times, at least.
Now, did you become, or was there a point in 2012 where she actually lived with you?
I do believe in 2012 she lived with me. She lived with me for a few years. I don't necessarily recollect the exact dates, but that sounds about when it was.
Do you recall approximately when she moved out, or actually I may ask, did she move out to live in an apartment complex?
She did. She moved out with one of her friends, and they got an apartment together.
Can you describe your sister Lauren physically? Her height and weight.
She's probably 5'3", 5'2", I would say, and I don't know, 120, 30 pounds maybe.
Okay. Mr. Wog, I'd like to direct your attention to the early morning hours of June 1st, 2012. Do you remember that morning?
I do.
Where were you that morning at around 4 a.m.?
I was home sleeping.
Did anybody live with you at the time?
No.
Did something occur that woke you from your sleep?
I was woken from my sleep from Lauren coming into the home.
All right. Did you see something or hear something first?
Heard and saw simultaneously, I would say.
Describe what you heard and saw that woke you out of your sleep, please.
Lauren's pretty much screaming, crying, very emotional.
Now, do you know how she was able to get into your home that morning?
She had a key to my house.
Where within your home did you encounter her? In other words, did she make it all the way to your bedroom? Was she outside? Where was she?
Basically, right close to my bedroom door, there was a little hallway, if you will, and came out as she was coming in, basically.
Okay. Was anyone with her when you saw her in your home that morning?
Chesney was with her.
How long had you known Chesney Goebel?
I don't know exactly how long, but for an extended period of time, I would say a year or close to that at least.
So, when you encountered your sister Lauren, can you describe her physical appearance on that morning in the hallway?
Less than stellar. She was pretty upset and not in a good place at all.
What did you physically see that led you to believe she was upset?
Screaming, crying, and almost not even able to speak.
Do you recall what she was wearing?
I don't recall what she was wearing.
Did you have an opportunity to observe Chesney Goebel when she was in your house that morning?
Yes.
Can you describe her demeanor that morning when she came into the house?
Very similar demeanor, very upset, in a state of panic. That's the way I would describe it.
Did you have the opportunity to ask them any questions, or did they just immediately start speaking?
No, I definitely asked them questions. They were just very hysterical, not saying too much. I was trying to find out what was going on.
Okay. Now, you described Lauren as somewhat hysterical, and you described your relationship as close to her. Does she typically show her emotion?
I would say she's not an overly emotional person in general. Less emotional than you would expect a young girl to be, and just generally speaking, pretty tough in that sense, I would say.
When you encountered her in this state that morning, what did you do?
Well, I was in a bit of a panic myself. This is a very close person to me, and I wanted to make her feel better, instantly. That's really all I wanted to do. So just tried to figure out what was going on. And
At any point, did someone from the house attempt to contact law enforcement?
yes, I advised them and said this is what we need to do, contact 911, and proceeded to do so.
Do you remember who made the call?
I believe that I dialed the phone and handed it to her to talk to them because it was difficult to get information out of her. I believe that I then actually was the one who did the talking after the fact.
You took the phone over from her.
Correct.
Did law enforcement at some point arrive at your home?
Yes.
How long did that take?
I recall that, I don't know the exact time frame, but I was surprised on the pretty quick response compared to my previous encounters with law enforcement and how long it would take. So they were pretty quick.
And when they arrived, did they take a written statement from you?
Yes.
No further questions.
Thank you. matters. If you have any cross-examination.
Yes.
Mr. Wag, sometime shortly after this, you went to the apartment that your sister and Chesney were living at, and you ran some of your own personal tests on Chesney's window, correct?
I'm not sure what a test. Which
You attempted to open it from a locked position, right?
I don't recall that.
You don't have any recollection of going to the window, to pushing on it to see if it would open up even though the lock mechanism was engaged?
I don't recall doing any type of investigation.
Okay. Do you have any you don't have any recollection of evaluating how high it was off the ground and whether or not a footprint would be left if someone your height had attempted to go through that window?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. You don't have any recollection of going to the outside of the window and not only pushing up on the window from a locked position to try and figure out how a person might open it if it was locked, but also evaluating how a person your height would climb through such a window?
Not directly after that. By the time I went to the apartment, there was law enforcement and other people doing all kinds of things. So I didn't really even do much.
At some point, do you recall doing that?
No.
How tall are you?
5'11".
After this happened, did your sister stay with you for any period of time, or did she leave the area?
She immediately, well, not immediately, maybe a few days later, left the area.
Okay. And Chesney Gobble, she stayed at your apartment for some period of time after that?
No.
Okay. You don't have any did she stay at your apartment at all?
She lived with me prior to this event, prior to the two girls getting an apartment together. She stayed there for a temporary period of time, and that was the only time.
Okay. The night after the incident, do you have any recollection of her staying there?
The night after the incident, yes.
Any additional time?
Maybe 1 or 2 days, if that.
Do you recall Ms. Gobble's behavior the day or two after, whether or not she was going out at night?
I don't recall.
Okay. Nothing further.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, any redirections?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Wag, thank you very much for your testimony. You're excused outside. Mr. Williams, you may call your next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Chesney Gogo.
We're going to need to take a quick break, so Ms. Goble can wait there. We're just going to take a short recess, about 10 minutes. Maybe we can reconvene in about 25 minutes after 10. And please remember not to discuss the case among yourselves or do any research on your own. You may leave your notepads on your chair, and we'll see you back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Your reaction? If you want any water, feel free to. If you do, just make sure you only drink small amounts. So you don't have to use the rest of it. That looks like your bottle's not
Be seated, and we will
balanced.
recess for about 10 minutes.
I'm going to make sure I use the restroom in case I get, just so I don't feel like